Hi, I'm Phil Pustiowski with freedommentor.com. I'm a real estate investor, mentor, coach, and I've been training people for about the past decade in here in this country as well as Canada and the Caribbean. And in this video, what I'm going to share with you is the biggest house flipping mistake that I see most investors make, as well as how to avoid it. And let me tell you, this is not just for beginners. This is just as applicable to experts. I see people that do 20, 30, 40 flips a year making this mistake. And here is the sad part. Most people don't realize it's a mistake at all. In fact, when this mistake occurs, typically what most investors do is blame the economy. They blame the real estate market. Sometimes they just blame their bad luck, when in reality, this mistake has nothing to do with outside factors. It has everything to do with the choices that investor makes. So before we dive in, I want to share with you a fundamental real estate truth. Some 60% of all real estate contracts that get signed between a buyer and a seller never make it to closing. 60%. More than half. So if you make any money whatsoever, ever, you do one deal in your life, you do 100 deals, where any money whatsoever is dependent on the selling of a piece of real estate, and you get a contract with a buyer, and 60% chance that it's never going to go through, wouldn't you like to know how to avoid that from happening in most cases? Wouldn't you like to put yourself in a better statistical average? All right, great. Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about how you can avoid this enormous mistake that most investors make. And here's what that mistake is. They don't control the buyer. Control the buyer. What does that mean? What does this mean? Control the buyer. I'll tell you what it means. It's especially problematic for real estate investors. Here's why. When you don't control the buyer, you let the buyer call all the shots in the deal. And real estate investors are notorious for this because they're always a twinge desperate to get rid of the property. Maybe it's their holding costs. Maybe they've had the property too long and they've had delays in construction and renovation. Or maybe it's just that they need the money right now to feed themselves. Either way, they get a little bit desperate and they let the buyer call the shots. When that happens, that's when deals don't close. Now you may be thinking, as I thought when I first got started, when my mentor shared with me this truth right here, I kind of stepped back a little bit and I said, wait a minute, I don't like to control people. I'm not manipulative. I like to let people make their own decisions. I don't feel comfortable, having to, quote, control somebody else to get a deal done. And it was interesting because he shared with me, he said, no, this doesn't hurt anybody. When you apply the correct techniques, and I'm going to talk about the 3 ways to control a buyer here in a second. When you apply those, you help everybody in the transaction. What you help is the buyer buy the home that they want. You help that buyer's agent in most cases. In most cases, a real estate agent is representing the buyer. You help them get their commission. You help the mortgage company originate a loan. You help the closing company get their fees. And you help you yourself get a property sold. So in fact, you're not manipulating anybody. By controlling the buyer correctly in a transaction, you're ensuring that everybody gets paid and everybody wins. And that was an eye-opener for me. So this technique of controlling the buyer is not only going to help you, it's going to help everybody in the transaction. The problem is most investors are so desperate to get rid of a property that they fold. They basically lay over and let the buyer take control. And when that happens, that's when you hit the 60% failure rate, which most people do. But you're not going to because you're on this video. All right, so let's talk about the 3 ways in which you can do this. The first way happens before you ever even talk to a buyer. it happens when you put it on the MLS in the listing remarks. Pre-approve buyer with your mortgage person. What happens when you have an offer come in most cases? They bring in a pre-approval letter, right? It's from their mortgage company, right? The buyer? Yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not nearly as helpful in you understanding if that person can actually get a loan as when your mortgage person reviews their financials. Now, how do you do that? How do you ensure that your mortgage person looks at the deal? Simple. You put it in the MLS listing. You put it in the realtor remarks. You put a sentence somewhere along the lines of, and by the way, if you want the exact language here, below this video, there's a link to the blog post that I wrote about this, and you can get the exact language, copy it verbatim for your next deal you're working on. Okay, so here's the language. The language is something along the lines of that the buyer can use any mortgage company they want to buy the property, but in order to make an offer on this property, they have to get pre-approved by the seller's preferred lender upon submission of offer. So you ask for it up front. And so what that does is when they submit an offer to you, they also have to get connection with your mortgage person. They don't have to do a loan with this person. They just have to connect with this person. And so what that does is that gives you greater insight into whether or not this person can actually get a loan. And here's what it also does. If you're a flipper, if you're an investor that's buying and reselling properties, if you have to sell that property in less than 90 days from the day you bought it, there's a lot of lenders that can't get that loan because it's called a title seasoning restriction in the underwriting guidelines. I have other videos on that particular subject. But if you have your mortgage person in place, though, ideally your mortgage person can get those loans in less than 90 days title seasoning, which we have trainings on that as well. And if you're an investor and you are doing deals and you don't have a go-to mortgage person that can get no title seasoning loans done, shame on you. No, I'm teasing. Go out there and go get one. Go get one fast, like today. It's huge. It's very important. Okay, so you get it approved by your mortgage person so that you know if they're a winner or not. Does that make sense? Now, what happens if they're paying all cash? Well, then get a statement from their bank showing that money is in a bank account. What if they're an investor and they're using a hard money loan? Well, talk to the hard money lender. Make sure they are a hard money lender and not the buyer's cousin, like I've seen before. And then verify that hard money lender is going to fund the deal. What if you find out that from your mortgage person that they're shaky, that they may not be able to get a loan? What do you do then? Move on. Don't tie your property up. It's a huge mistake. I see it all the time. Investors are so desperate to sell their property that they tie their property up with a buyer who can't get a loan. They're hoping for a wing and a prayer. Because here's what really happens in the real world, kind of blows my mind. Buyer's agents, real estate agents that represent buyers, sometimes will drive people around for days, weeks, months, showing them properties, and the person can't even get a loan. It's crazy. They basically are trying to throw out a Hail Mary and hoping for a miracle in the end zone. Don't fall victim to it. It doesn't matter what the buyer's agent says. It doesn't matter what the buyer says about how good they are with getting a loan. You need to get verification from your mortgage person to know for real. And if they can't get a loan or it's going to be shaky, don't tie your property up, because when a good buyer comes along, if you've got it tied up, you can't sell it to them. Have the courage to say no. I can't tell you how much money you'll make by that piece of advice, but it takes courage, but it's going to pay off. Okay, number 2. This piece of advice I'm about to tell you is the most not followed advice I give in real estate, and it blows my mind. This is going to save you tens of thousands of dollars if you listen carefully and you follow through with it. You see, I'm getting passionate now because it drives me crazy when people don't follow this advice. We've learned this lesson the hard way. We've been bitten by this so many times, you don't have to be. In other words, the stove is hot. Now, if you need to touch your finger on the stove to know that it's hot, then you're going to learn this lesson the hard way. Or you can just take my word for it that the stove is hot, it's going to burn your finger, and it's going to hurt. Okay, are you ready? All right. Require I'm going to use that word here because if I don't write it down, you may not remember that part. Require non-refundable earnest money. Non-refundable earnest money. What that looks like in the real world, though, is that you want to have some sort of provision in there. And by the way, you can go back to that link just below this video that takes you to the blog post and get the exact language to put in your contracts. But you're going to require non-refundable earnest money once the inspection period is over. So you give them the time to go inspect the property, and if they don't like it, they can get their earnest money back. But after that inspection period, that earnest money becomes non-refundable. I can already hear the naysayers. Whoa, wait a minute. You know, it doesn't always work that way, Phil. I mean, some buyers won't agree to that. Okay. Well, after over 1,000 transactions that we've been a part of the past decade, I can say unequivocally that if a person won't put down non-refundable earnest money after the inspection period, they're not serious about buying your property anyways, or they are scared they won't be able to get a loan. In either case, you don't want to tie your property up with them anyways. Because see, here's what happens in the real world. What they'll do is they will submit an offer, and if you don't require non-refundable earnest money, they have no real skin in the game. And they'll tie you up for 30, 60 days, and if the loan doesn't go through, they get their earnest money back, and you're out 60 days of holding costs. Happens all the time. But when you require non-refundable earnest money, if they can't get that loan, you get to keep that earnest money, and that helps offset your closing or your holding costs. Or you can still give them the money back if you feel like it, but at least you have more control. And I'll say this as well. When somebody's got non-refundable earnest money in the game, they're more committed to find a way to get a loan closed. It's that simple. So you're going to hear from other real estate agents, especially buyer's agents. They're going to say, well, you know, in my 10 years of real estate, I've never heard of such a thing, and I've never allowed my buyer to do non-refundable earnest money. When they give you that spiel, which we've heard 100 times, here's what you say, and do it with all sincerity. There's a first time for everything. You see, you're not going to tie your property up with refundable earnest money because your property is too important for that. This right here is the essence of controlling the buyer. When you get non-refundable earnest money, if you did nothing else right, if all you did was this, step 2, bingo. Well done. I'll tell you, buyers and buyer's agents will do everything under the sun to weasel out of this. They will spend hours trying to figure out how to weasel out of this. But if they're serious about buying the home, they'll do it every time. The home I'm sitting in right now, I put non-refundable earnest money down when I bought it. Okay? If you're serious about buying a house, you put non-refundable earnest money down on a house. So I practice what I preach. Not only do I demand it from people that are buying my houses, I did it when I was buying a house. Okay? So there you go. All right, so that's step 2 in the controlling the buyer. The other way you can control the buyer, and this one right here is sometimes case-by-case basis, but it's still pretty important to clarify, and that is your post-inspection response. Okay, so if you are buying houses and reselling them to first-time home buyers especially, or people that don't buy houses all that much, even investors in cases, when an inspector goes in and does an inspection, they typically find a whole bunch of problems. And when they provide that report to the prospective buyer, the buyer typically freaks out. They read all these things, oh my gosh, oh, the house is going to fall over tomorrow, and they're freaking out. Now, where does that come from? Well, a little bit of background into this. Inspectors. Hey, I love inspectors, nothing against them. But in many cases, they have to justify their job because somebody pays them $300 to go do an inspection report. Well, what if they came back with a report that had nothing on it? What if it was a blank piece of paper? They said, you know, the house is perfect. It's brand new. There's no problem with it. The person would get ticked off, wouldn't they? They said, why did I pay you $300 for a blank piece of paper? Right? So the inspector has to justify their job in some cases. Now, in other cases, they do legitimately find real problems that the buyer needs to know about. And in fact, it's stuff you may not have known about either as the person selling the property. And so there are times where that inspection report is critical. But what's more important is not the inspection report, but how you respond to it. I'll tell you, there's 3 ways in which most people respond. No, excuse me, 3 ways that they respond. The first one is how most people respond. All right, here's what it looks like. The inspection report comes back. The buyer's agent writes down a laundry list of things that need to be done. And then they send it to you. And they demand it must be done by a licensed and bonded electrician and licensed and professional plumber and da-da-da-da-da-da. And then what the seller does is they freak out. They go make a bunch of phone calls and they just start systematically trying to fix everything as fast as they can so the deal will close. That's option 1. You can be frantic about it. That's the opposite of controlling the buyer, as you probably would have guessed from my tone. All right, so the second way you can handle your post-inspection response is you get non-refundable earnest money. And so when you get that inspection list, you start chipping away at it, but you know that if the person doesn't buy, at least you have some non-refundable earnest money to offset those additional expenses and out-of-pocket money you just put forth to fix the house up, right? Now, that's not a bad response, and there are some situations where that may make sense. But I'm going to show you the best way, the controlling the buyer way to do it. Ready? And this is the way that we teach most of our students do it on most deals, and it requires no money out of pocket. Are you ready? Okay, good. Here's how you do it. You go through the list with the buyer or the buyer's agent or both, and you whittle that list down to just the bare necessities. We're talking just the line items that if you didn't get it done, or there weren't some concessions made on those line items, that they would leave and walk away. We call them the deal killers. If there were any deal killers on that list, that's what you want to focus on. The next thing you want to do is get a contractor, handyman, somebody to give you an estimate on what it's going to cost to fix that. And then you want to go back to the buyer's agent and say, look, these are the things that you absolutely had to get fixed or you wouldn't buy the property, right? And the person says yes. Okay, this is how much it's going to cost to fix it, and this is who can fix it. We'll reduce the total, whether it's paying off some closing costs, maybe you were going to pay their closing costs, or you can reduce the purchase price. Say, we're going to reduce the purchase price or the incentives, concessions, whatever. We're going to increase those to meet this $3,000 that needs to be done to fix the house up in order for you to buy. So instead of you fixing it, you give them a credit of $3,000 in the closing statement. Here's what that does for you. Number 1, it means you don't have to worry about bringing any more money out of pocket to fix anything else up on that house because it's time for you to get that house sold, right? Number 2, it means you don't have any delays from any contractors that may try to fix the property up and then call you up and say, yeah, we're having some problems here. Now, you avoid all that. You literally just give them a credit on the closing statement. And here's the beauty of that. They may think that's the best win of all because they may not have wanted those things fixed anyways. They would have still bought it even if you would have said no to everything, but instead you're giving them some extra money. It's real and it works. So now they may have the decision whether to never fix it up at all. They may take that extra $3,000 and go on a vacation with it. Who knows? Who cares? The point is you got the deal closed. You controlled the buyer. Does that make sense? All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. The key component of this is that the biggest house flipping mistake investors make, both beginners and experts alike, is that they don't control the buyer. But you can because you watch this video. And the way you're going to do that is by pre-approving the buyer with your mortgage person, by requiring non-refundable earnest money, and by having the post-inspection response of giving the person concessions or credits for the bare essential deal killer inspection items. All right, well, I'm Phil Pustiowski with freedommentor.com. And if you have any more thoughts on this, I want to hear them. If you've been burned before, if you totally disagree with me, I'm all ears. Because if you can share with me things that I've never heard before, I love it. I'm all ears. You'll see from our other videos, I'm always commenting back and forth. I love to hear the feedback from those that are watching these videos. And if you want to learn more in depth on the exact clauses to use, go to that link just below this video and go to that blog post I put together so you can see the actual test. You can copy and paste it for your own deals. All right, I'm Phil Pustiowski, freedommentor.com. Check out our other videos as well. See what we're doing. And if you'd like to work with us on more of a one-on-one basis, then go to our website. You can apply to become our next apprentice because we're always looking for new people in different areas. And we have some people already taking up certain areas. But it's a big country out there in the Caribbean and Canada. There's a lot A lot of deals to be had out there. All right. Thanks so much for your time, y'all.